Well, hello everyone and good afternoon. Welcome to Education Commission of the State's first webinar of the new year on education policy trends to watch at the state level in 2026. It is really wonderful to see such a large group of folks joining us today across many leading organizations in the space. Thank you for making the time to participate in this conversation. Your participation really enriches the discussion, and we are really thrilled to have you here. A warm welcome to each of you, and thanks for being a part of the first webinar this year. My name is Tiffany McDole. I'm a policy director at ECS, and I'll be your guide through today's session. Today, we will be diving into a critical look at the past year's education policy changes at the state level and what might be coming in the year ahead. As a leader on our policy team, I'm especially proud to highlight our team members who will share insights on topics from early care and education to K-12 funding to post-secondary, offering valuable perspectives on how recent shifts in policy may impact students, educators, and the overall education system. We are grateful to be able to bring you this content and to be your team at the forefront of tracking developments in state education policy. ECS webinars are designed to provide you with tools and resources that you can apply in your work, enhancing everyone's ability to address key challenges in state education policy. We're really pleased to start off this year's webinar series with such an important discussion, and we'll start by meeting today's presenters, all from Education Commission of the States. You will have the pleasure of hearing from 6 of our team members today. Lauren Bloomquist will be covering post-secondary education trends. Chris Duncombe will focus on K-12 finance. Adrienne Fischer is focused on issues in early learning and will cover ECE trends today. Heena Kuwayama will give an overview of developments in school choice. Katja Krieger will be covering health trends today. And Lauren Peisach will cover teaching trends. This presentation will be grounded in the education policy trends from 2025, of course, focused on the state level. We determine these trends through our analysis of state education policy tracking, information requests, and other sources. At ECS, we track state education policy through legislative tracking for all 50 states and the District of Columbia. We read and summarize every education bill that is enacted or vetoed. In 2025 alone, we tracked over 5,400 introduced bills in education policy and summarized 1,064 bills that were enacted or vetoed. We also answered 400 unique information requests, which are questions we received directly from constituents about key policy issues, which gives us a different lens and unique insights into the questions and priorities on the minds of policymakers. We also analyzed governors' State of the State addresses, executive orders, state ballot initiatives, task force reports, and other sources of state activity to determine trending topics. The 6 top trends we saw in 2025 and anticipate to continue into the year ahead are listed here and will be discussed in more detail in this order, with an eye for lessons to inform the year ahead. Those trends are teaching and attention to the teacher workforce, K-12 funding, school choice, student health and wellness, post-secondary education, and early care in education. After we hear from the ECS staff members on these topics, we will be glad to answer your questions on these 6 topics or any others on your mind. You can use the Q&A feature within the Zoom webinar format to submit your question at any time. You don't need to hold them till the end. And with that, we're going to kick things off by discussing one of the highest volume areas of policymaking at the state level, teaching. And for that, I'll hand it to Lauren Peisach.
Thanks, Tiffany. I'm Lauren Peisach. I'm a senior policy analyst here at ECS, and I track and work on teaching issues here. Teaching continues to be a focus of state policymakers, and it continues to track in our top 5 or 6 issues year after year. And that's for good reason. We know that teaching quality remains the most important in-school factor that influences student achievement. And we also know that many of the challenges that teachers are facing aren't necessarily new, and so some of the responses aren't necessarily new. However, we did last year see a continued expansion of some ongoing trends we've seen over the last couple of years that we're going to highlight today. So last year, we saw at least 115 pieces of enacted legislation regarding teaching, and we also updated our 50-state comparison on teacher recruitment and retention, which gives us a unique look at some of the changes that states made. We last updated that resource in 2022, and since then, many states have added or expanded programs to strengthen the teacher pipeline. So that includes 4 more states adding programs to recruit high school students to the teaching profession, and 6 states that added programs to offer a pathway to recruit paraprofessionals to the profession, among other changes and initiatives. As legislators work to strengthen the teacher pipeline, we have seen policies that address these 3 components. They are paid pathways, holistic staffing, and compensation. So in paid pathways this year, continuing a trend that we've seen over the last several years, states continue to expand and create new grow your own programs, as well as teacher residency and apprenticeship programs. That's to better prepare aspiring educators, and some of these programs come at no cost to the candidates. One emerging trend is state attention to stipends or other means of compensations for student teachers to ensure that completing clinical experience is not an undue financial burden that could keep qualified teachers away from the classroom. We highlighted this growing approach in the fall in a blog post. Holistic staffing. So in holistic staffing, we included things like teacher preparation and professional development and working conditions. In this area, we've seen efforts to support teachers, including strengthening teacher preparation programs, improving working conditions, providing professional development to help support teachers who are already in the classroom, support their growth as educators. In working conditions, we've seen things like the expansion of maternity leave to teachers in Arizona charter schools, paying teachers for taking on additional courses outside of their required course loads, and providing teacher support in the area of discipline. We've also seen that in order to support new literacy and numeracy efforts, states have sought to also expand support to teachers, both in preparation programs, but also in professional development. That way, teachers who are already in the classroom are prepared to take on these new curricula. And finally, for compensation, another trend that continued on into 2025 was attention to teacher compensation. So states paid attention to raising teacher pay and incentives to both recruit new teachers and also to retain teachers at various points in their career. We highlighted some of those financial incentives also within our 50-state comparison that we updated last year. So now for some state examples. In Tennessee, we saw Tennessee revised the eligibility and administration of the Future Teacher Scholarship. It provides $3,500 per year for up to 3 years and allows for transfers between eligible institutions without losing the award. For our next example, in Washington, another national trend that we saw this year was expanding grow your own residency and apprenticeship pathways. Washington followed along in that trend by directing their Professional Educator Standards Board to establish a new process to approve teacher residency programs. In Louisiana, they continued on this holistic staffing model trend and are requiring instruction and testing on numeracy as a component for teacher certification. They also implemented a requirement that teachers must complete professional development if they teach certain math courses. And in compensation. So we know that states have sought to find ways to improve teacher pay. For some states that don't set a minimum salary, that might look like bonuses or stipends for particular staffing particular courses or working in specific schools. But for other states that do set a minimum teacher salary, we've seen efforts to increase that salary. So in New Mexico, they have 3 levels for teacher certification, and they bumped up the salary by $5,000 a year for each level. So level 1 went from $50,000 a year to $55,000 a year. And Chris has more to say on that when he talks about school finance. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris.
Thank you, Lauren. My name is Chris Duncombe. I'm a principal here at ECS, and I'm going to be talking about K-12 finance trends that we've identified. I'm mostly going to be focused on what's happening at the state level, but I did just want to spend a few moments to highlight the shifting federal role that state leaders saw throughout 2025. Some of the notable activity that we saw first was the end of ESSER, the $180 billion investment in emergency relief. That came to an end. The obligation deadline was back in 2024, but with extensions to districts that ran into 2025. So this was a large infusion of federal funds to schools that has come to completion. In addition, there's been some uncertainty throughout the year around timing of federal funds and funding levels. An example being on July 1st, when the federal government did not disperse $6.2 billion in federal funding for 5 different programs. These dollars went under review by the Office of Management and Budget and were later released, but did create uncertainty in states and districts about how much funds they were going to receive. And most of the attention since then has been focused around the upcoming 2026 fiscal year budget. The Department of Education has submitted their budget request that included block granting of 18 programs into a K-12 simplified funding program and an overall reduction of 15%. The Congress has been reviewing that request and putting forward their own proposal. Last week, the House approved a bipartisan budget bill that's now being considered by the Senate that largely maintains prior year funding and does not block grant or eliminate K-12 programs. And the Senate has till the end of the week to pass this bill. So that deadline is rapidly approaching, and we're waiting to see if that bipartisan bill gets approved or not. But that is a long way to say that state leaders have been making funding decisions throughout this year with a lot of uncertainty about level of federal funding and how that will be structured. In terms of action at the state level, in 2025, we summarized 99 enacted or vetoed bills in the K-12 funding space. This is a bit down from our average of about 150 bills a year, and I think that may partially be driven by some of the uncertainty that we saw at the federal level. But in terms of the trends we've seen, they mirror a lot of the trends we've seen in past years. First is states shifting their funding formulas. We've seen several states enact major reforms in the last few years. In 2022, it was Tennessee. Last year, both Mississippi, or I should say in 2024, both Mississippi and Colorado. And then last year, Alabama adopted a new formula called Renewing of Alabama's Investment in Student Excellence, or RAISE Act. And I'll discuss that in a little bit more detail in a second. The second trend we've seen are states adjusting the additional funding that they're allocating for certain student populations. And states often look at these funding amounts and adjust them. This year, we did see that states also changed how they identified those students for extra funds. And then the last trend, with some overlap with what Lauren shared, states continue to make investments in teacher recruitment and retention, particularly emphasizing the importance of competitive starting teacher salaries. So diving into some of the state examples, I mentioned that Alabama adopted the RAISE Act. This continues on a trend of states shifting towards student-based funding formulas. A student-based funding formula is one where the state provides a base level amount per student that's allocated to every student in the state, and then provides supplemental weights for students receiving additional services. And Alabama's new formula invests $165 million in state funds in its first year of implementation to support those new weights that I have listed for those students on the slide. The state also put in place supports for districts to transition to this new funding formula. It includes a professional learning series that the state is putting on, where they're providing guidance on how to budget at the district level. this will be important for district leaders as this new formula does provide a lot of flexibility in the spending choices at local districts. In addition, the state has established two implementation and oversight bodies to help with that transition to the new funding formula. Moving on to student populations, New Mexico has shifted how they're identifying students from low-income backgrounds. They are now the first state in the country to use state income tax records to allocate their need-based funding. The state first piloted this initiative in 2021 when they adopted the Family Income Index to provide targeted interventions. In 2025, they enacted legislation to expand its application to allocate all of their at-risk aid in their K-12 funding formula. And to implement this program, they did have to have collaboration across three of the state agencies, the Department of Education, Taxation, and Human Services. And I think this is a notable decision, as in it is somewhat different than many states that typically rely on participation in federal benefit programs to identify students from low-income backgrounds like SNAP, TANF, and Medicaid. And this approach of using participation in these programs can result in undercounts of students due to lack of knowledge about eligibility or barriers to enrollment. So New Mexico's example provides an approach that does not rely on federal data or participation in federal programs. And the last example I'll highlight is from Montana. They adopted the STARS Act to increase the competitiveness of starting teacher salaries in the state. The state is offering a financial incentive to districts that raise their beginning teacher salaries to align better with their average teacher pay. So districts must have a starting teacher salary that is 62% of the district-wide average to be eligible to receive those state incentive funds. So put numbers on that. If a district has an average salary of $80,000, that would mean that their starting pay would have to be about $50,000 to be eligible for state funds. And the state is investing $55 million in its first year of implementation, and the legislation had bipartisan support. So with that, that's my overview of the K-12 funding legislation we've seen. I will now transition to Heena, who's going to be discussing school choice, where there's also been a lot of action.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Heena. I'm a policy analyst here at ECS, and I track legislation related to school choice. I will primarily be focusing on state-level policies, but before we jump into those trends, I do want to acknowledge that last year at the federal level, there was some notable action related to school choice. In July, HR 1 was passed, and it creates the first federal school choice tax incentive, a tax credit of $1,700 for donations to approved scholarship granting organizations. Program regulations are still being drafted by the Treasury Department, but some states have already begun opting in through the IRS's advance election process. In addition to that, some governors have signed executive orders requiring their states to participate, and some legislatures have introduced bills related to state participation in the program, but none of these bills that we've identified so far have been enacted. At the state level, there has also been notable action related to school choice. Every year, ECS covers the governor's State of the State addresses and analyzes them for their education policies. 2025 was the first year that school choice made it into the brief due to the number of times that it was mentioned. At least 21 governors highlighted school choice efforts in their State of the State addresses last year, making it one of the leading themes across states. Some governors stressed the importance of oversight and accountability, while others noted the importance of making more students eligible for programs like education savings accounts or school vouchers. In state legislation, we saw three major trends. The first was charter schools. We saw states look to address charter funding, governance, or accountability. A second trend was open enrollment expansion, where we saw several states expanding public school choice by removing limitations on open enrollment or requiring districts to adopt open enrollment policies. And a third trend was universal school choice. We saw several states either establish new programs or expand existing programs to include universal eligibility so that they're open to all students to apply for with no eligibility restrictions by income or other characteristics. It's important to note that universal eligibility doesn't necessarily mean universal access to funds for students, and many of these programs do prioritize awards or reserve a portion of awards for certain students based on income or other characteristics. Jumping into some state examples to illustrate these trends. Last year, Arkansas passed HB 1672, which requires, among other things, that charters for schools receiving an F accountability rating for 3 consecutive years must be revoked. The bill also provides a hearing process for charter reinstatement. In addition to those accountability provisions, the bill also removes some statutory application requirements for a public school seeking conversion charter school status, and it removes requirements around annual reviews of open enrollment charters and monthly reporting requirements for first-year charters. In the open enrollment space, New Hampshire enacted SB 97, which allows a parent or guardian to apply for their student's transfer to any other school inside or outside of the student's residential district. The bill also prevents a superintendent from refusing an intra-district transfer for any reason besides a lack of capacity at the school. And in terms of school choice programs with universal eligibility, we saw Texas pass SB 2, which implements a new education savings account program that includes universal eligibility. The program does prioritize students with disabilities who are members of a household with an annual income below 500% of the federal poverty guideline for awards. This program was appropriated $1 billion in SB 1, and it will include homeschool students, but the awards they have access to are lower. And an additional example of a program with universal eligibility is in Idaho HB 93, which establishes the Idaho Parental Choice Tax Credit. It provides for a refundable tax credit of up to $5,000 for qualified education expenses, and the tax credit increases to $7,500 for children with disabilities. All families are able to apply for the tax credit with the universal eligibility, but highest priority will be given to families with an income below 300% of the federal poverty level. Next up is Katja with some health trends.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Katja Krieger, and I am a policy analyst who tracks health legislation. In the health and wellness space, state legislative trends from recent years have continued, with state policymakers seeking to provide a broad array of supports for student mental and physical health. For mental and behavioral health, states explored the expansion of mental health screenings, broadened the availability of resources to address mental and behavioral health, and sought to expand the school mental health professional workforce. In physical health, states continue to expand the services and resources allowed to be provided in schools, including expanding types of medication or treatments that can be provided in school settings. A number of states also look to grow protections for student athletes, upping requirements for concussion protocol and cardiac emergency response plans related to student physical activity. And lastly, for meals and nutrition, policymakers work to define healthy meals, in some cases looking to reduce additives in school meals or to encourage local food in schools. States expanded free meals either broadly or to specific student populations. So let's look at some state examples in this space. So, Louisiana Senate Bill 121 allows each city, parish, or local school board to offer mental health screenings for all K-12 students in the first semester of the school year. So, if a student's screening demonstrates potential mental health conditions, the bill requires schools to notify parents and/or guardians and provide a list of resources available to the student in the school or community, and the bill also requires parental consent for such screenings. In the physical health space, we saw states continue to make adjustments to resources, medications, and other physical health provisions available in schools. So in West Virginia, the state joins a list of states expanding requirements for cardiac emergency response plans and AEDs in schools. West Virginia Senate Bill 652 expands cardiac emergency requirements to elementary schools, requiring schools with athletic programs to develop cardiac emergency response plans and to train certain personnel in CPR and the use of defibrillators. And within school meals, we saw states look to expand school meal availability and define healthy food qualifications. In Arkansas, Senate Bill 59 requires schools to provide all public school students with a breakfast at no cost. So, regardless of the student's eligibility for federally funded free or reduced price meals, beginning with the 25-26 school year. So across the board, we're seeing how state policymakers are adapting comprehensive health supports and health education, mental and behavioral health, and nutrition services. And with that, I'll pass it to Lauren to share about post-secondary trends.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Katja. I'm Lauren Bloomquist, a senior policy analyst covering post-secondary issues. For our post-secondary trends, we see a mix of familiar topics with refined approaches. The first category, student debt relief, had the largest number of bills in 2025. States continue to address high-demand workforce needs by offering student loan repayment and debt relief for high-demand fields, such as teaching and healthcare. This trend also appears in post-secondary workforce development legislation. Next, we saw several state legislatures consider bills in the area of academic programs and credentialing. Several states enacted bills that alter the requirements for academic credentialing programs by mandating the inclusion of certain content or standards. We saw this specifically in academic programs for teacher credentialing, and at least one state added requirements for certain early childhood teachers. We also saw bills aimed at addressing low enrollment in programs by requiring institutions to evaluate and eliminate programs with low participation. And finally, we saw several states looking to adjust funding systems that incentivize outcomes. States continue to focus on promoting value and creating a return on investments for students in post-secondary institutions and systems. Next, I'll share state examples that highlight each one of these trends. Connecticut SB 1450 establishes a healthcare provider loan reimbursement program to reduce financial burdens for full-time providers, with targeted support for primary care providers and rural service areas. An example in the area of academic programs and credentialing is Oregon's SB 784, which requires that statewide standards for dual credit programs include agriculture, forestry, and natural resource programs. And for outcomes-based funding beginning in the 2026-27 school year, Arkansas HB 1512 requires a return on investment metric in the productivity-based funding model for state-supported institutions of higher education, including both 2-year and 4-year institutions. Next up, we have Adrienne to share early care and education trends.
Thanks, Lauren, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrienne Fischer, and I'm a principal here at ECS, and I am going to run through a few of the major trends and themes that we've seen in early care and education over the past year. We do know that ECE infrastructure is still struggling to meet demand, and with federal funding no longer providing supplemental support, states are stepping up to help sustain both the ECE workforce and the providers who employ them. States are making an effort to incentivize workforce entry by improving compensation and creating better career pathways for current and future members of the ECE workforce, removing both administrative and financial barriers for providers by providing grants or subsidies and supporting quality improvement to help providers achieve a high level of care. Several states have been working to increase access to early care and education programs and services. We've seen states implementing categorical eligibility for child care subsidies for members of the ECE workforce, re-examining subsidy and reimbursement rates to reflect the cost of care, and looking for ways to improve efficiency, such as reforming zoning regulations and creating coordinated enrollment systems. We've seen a lot of momentum over the last several years to change how early reading is taught, with most states enacting one or more policies requiring early reading instruction to focus on evidence-based practices. And those strategies include requiring school districts to adopt curricula aligned with the science of reading, providing targeted interventions, and integrating those principles into teacher preparation programs and professional development modules. We've also tracked at least 14 states that have enacted legislation aimed to support early numeracy development. These policies tend to follow a similar structure to early literacy, including training and professional development, coaching, high-quality instructional materials, and tutoring and interventions. To share a few state examples, last year, Arkansas passed legislation to allow early care and education workers to join the state's teacher retirement system. And while those employees won't receive state contributions, this is an important step in improving access to basic benefits that many ECE workers don't currently receive. Connecticut created the Early Childhood Education Endowment, which will subsidize state-funded childcare and pre-K programs to reduce costs to families. The endowment will support programs across the birth to 5 continuum, combining some pre-existing programs to expand access and streamline the eligibility and application process. And in Oklahoma, they passed legislation to require math screening for students in grades 2 through 5. Students not on track to achieve grade proficiency must be provided with an individualized math intervention program, and students exceeding grade level proficiency must be provided with advanced math opportunities. The bill appropriates funding for professional development, screenings and interventions, and summer programs. And I also wanted to briefly address a few things that are happening on the federal level with potential implications for state policy. We're now about 18 months removed from the COVID-19 funding expiration date. That was in September of 2024. But because it's difficult to gather data in the ECE sector, we haven't gotten a full picture of how providers and families have been affected. We've certainly heard anecdotally and through smaller scale surveys that many providers are struggling and wait lists are growing, but we should have a better idea this year of how the sector as a whole is faring. As Chris mentioned, we're approaching the next budget deadline at the end of the month, and it's looking like we will see more or less level funding for the Child Care Development Fund and Head Start, with both chambers' proposals reflecting that. And finally, I wanted to mention that earlier this month, 23 states received federal preschool development grants, with awards ranging from 1.3 to 14.7 million. These are one-year grants that give states an opportunity to approach ECE service delivery collaboratively and systemically. So we really look forward to hearing more about these states' efforts. And with that, we've ended our trends presentation, but I want to pass it back to Tiffany to facilitate your questions.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for the information that you've prepared for our audience today. For the audience, we welcome your questions on these topics and any other topic you're curious about in terms of what states may be taking on in the year ahead for education policy. We encourage you to submit those through the Q&A function. We're going to begin with a question we received related to finance. So Chris, I'll hand this to you. The question is, how are states responding to declining enrollment in public schools and the impact on school funding?
Thanks, Tiffany. Yes, that's a big question right now in the school funding space, and one that I think we're starting to see some of the state policy responses to, and I think we're going to be continuing to see more of that this year and the coming years. The National Center for Education Statistics is projecting over a 5% decline in student enrollment nationally by 2031. And that's not just in a few areas of the states or a few areas of the country. 40 of 50 states are projected to have those enrollment declines. In terms of the policy responses that we've seen so far, we initially saw a lot of states enacting temporary hold harmless policies. This was particularly present during COVID. And by hold harmless policy, I mean that they reverted to prior year enrollment or attendance counts rather than using current year. Most of those hold harmless policies have expired. So now the new approaches that we've been seeing from states have included using averages across multiple years rather than just 1 year. Many states had already done this previously, but states that were using 1 year counts to shift to this average across multiple years so that there is not as immediate impact from declining enrollment, but it's kind of like phased in over time. Another example we've seen is states setting up stabilization accounts. So dedicating money to a non-reverting fund where they can allocate aid to districts that are seeing declining enrollment. Florida created an enrollment stabilization fund 2 years ago with a large appropriation from the state to assist in that transition. So I think those are some of the responses we've seen so far. Looking forward, I'm envisioning that we'll also see more solutions that involve shared services or regional education service providers to offer particularly specialized services for smaller or rural school districts that are seeing some of these enrollment declines. So that's what we've seen, but I think we'll continue to see a lot of action in the space going forward.
Thank you, Chris, for the comprehensive answer. A trend to watch, absolutely moving forward. Our next question is about an area where we saw a lot of legislative activity in the prior two sessions. Katja, I wanted to send this question to you. How have states approached cell phones in schools, but specifically as a mental health issue?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, we're seeing many states consider how and when to ban cell phones and devices during the school day. And some state legislation has taken more of a holistic approach to look at the impact of cell phones and devices on student well-being. For example, Colorado legislation requires that district policies on cell phone use include consideration of media literacy, social emotional learning, and other areas related to student well-being. Another example is Georgia, which is requiring students to be educated on the impact of social media on mental health from grades 6 to 12. And they've also adopted device restrictions for grades 8 to 12. And then another example is North Carolina's recent legislation on device restrictions, which is also including a provision requiring instruction on social media, including personal and interpersonal skills. So, as states approach this issue, we're seeing how they're considering the impact on student health and well-being.
Thank you so much, Katja. A lot of great questions rolling in, so thank you to everyone for submitting. I want to pause briefly to mention that if you haven't already seen, we will be sharing a recording of the presentation in a post-webinar email, and we'll make sure that important links are shared as well, just to make sure everybody's on the same page there. Our next question is about post-secondary around the cost of college. And in particular, how are we seeing states respond to the cost of post-secondary in the context of student debt, but also in funding for high-need fields? What are we seeing around questions of pathways and access? I presume particularly into those high-need fields from the person asking the question. Lauren Bloomquist, we'll start with you, and if anyone else would like to chime in, please do.
Absolutely. Just like the example that I shared in the presentation, we do see states looking at what are those high needs fields, what are the types of jobs that are most prevalent in their states, and how can they get more students in those fields. And the way that they're doing that is, again, through providing debt relief, loan relief, and then another part that I didn't touch on is providing scholarships for specific areas. We do see that states are looking again to try to show students what kind of value a post-secondary education has, and we see that also with their funding. making sure that institutions are showing what a return on investment can be for a student.
Sorry about that. Double click the mute. Thank you, Lauren. That's a very helpful answer. I'll let folks know that we also are tracking this carefully in terms of implications for high school and connections between high school and post-secondary around high demand fields. As we close out today, we're going to share a really robust resource our team released at the end of last year around state data systems. And one of the elements of that project was looking at education to workforce connections, and not only the K-12 data system, but connections to post-secondary and workforce, which is an element of having a systematic response to the question of how high demand fields are being considered. The next question is a big one, and simply stated, how are states responding to AI issues? I'll begin here, and then others please chime in, especially Adrienne and Heena have worked on this issue. We have been tracking this closely and have a response on our website we can direct folks to of how states are thinking about AI in education. Of course, states are adjusting to the executive order from December around state regulation of artificial intelligence. But in addition to looking at guidance or regulation, you can see in our tracking that many states have formed task forces over the past 2 years. That's been one of the most frequent sources of activity at the state level. And we've looked at those task force reports to see what trends are emerging. We also have seen that many states are looking to educators and providing training or information for educators, as well as engaging in questions around procurement and thinking about what the state role can be in vetting and approving products, but also doing some coordinated contracting so that smaller districts might have access to better pricing than they could achieve on their own with a low number of students for specific educational products. Beyond that, we've seen, I would say, just generally speaking, a balance of states looking to maximize the advantages that may come from these technologies while mitigating risk. That's the theme across all of the activity in artificial intelligence. With that, I'll pause. It doesn't, in case anyone looks like they want to chime in, but I think that may cover it on AI, and you can check out the link for more information. With that, let's tackle another question. We have a question here about the NAEP release that came out last year and what states are doing around literacy. Do we see increased funding, increased attention to literacy? And I'll add, what do we see around numeracy? This came up in a couple of our trend areas, but if Adrienne, I'll start with you. What are we seeing around literacy and numeracy, and particularly anything we saw in response to the NAEP release last year?
Yeah, obviously there are a lot of states that are focused on this, given some of those disappointing results in states. And I think really there are still states that are in the process of implementing policies that they've passed in legislation over the last couple of years, but are still not quite fully implemented. So we're watching some of that as states really fully get into those processes. But I do think that a lot of states, they have these policies in place, but they're still really trying to figure out what is the best way to implement them and make sure that those policies are being carried out in classrooms with fidelity. I think that we're seeing a lot of states that want to create more of a dialogue with teachers and also with institutes of higher education to make sure that those changes that they're trying to make to teacher preparation programs are done in a way that is collaborative and that has buy-in from all the stakeholders. I think a lot of the messages that we're seeing from folks is to sort of stay the course in the sense that the policies that are being put into place are the correct policies that will get the results eventually. But I think that implementation level of things, so really kind of at that state education agency level and providing the right guidance, providing the right professional development, the right interventions, and also providing supports, whether that's financial supports. I think there are a lot of states that are realizing that the things that they are requiring in implementing these policies are going to require additional financial supports. So I expect to see more of that in 2026 and beyond.
Thanks, Adrienne. Much appreciated. I would agree that this is a trend to watch in the year ahead. We may not see quite as much legislative activity around literacy and numeracy, but a real increased or just sustained focus in those areas. And for states who haven't been active in the mathematics space yet, we're seeing a lot of interest there. For the next question, we're going to switch gears and talk about assessment and accountability. The question is, what trends are we seeing relative to assessment and accountability? And I believe this is specifically in the K-12 education space. While Lauren Bloomquist does wonderful post-secondary work for us, she's also one of our leading thinkers on assessment and accountability. So I'll turn it over to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Tiffany. I think in assessment and accountability, what we're seeing is a lot of waiting to see what the federal government is going to say as it relates to what states have submitted to the Department of Education so far. We recently saw that Iowa was able to combine some of its funding streams. Indiana has a huge proposal that's at the Department of Education right now. The clock for that is ticking to receive the response from the Department of Ed. And I think what we're going to see is states looking to see kind of what the reaction is to those proposals, and then follow suit in terms of what leeway the department is going to give for assessment and accountability.
Thank you, Lauren. And as we are in this moment with some action yet to come, we please, hope you'll keep us in mind as the year continues around questions you might have in a developing landscape in assessment and accountability. We have a number of questions that build on this theme of connections from K-12 to workforce. Specifically, what is being done to intentionally bridge K-12 and post-secondary education? Are we seeing an increased focus on preparing students for the workforce in K-12? A couple other questions that are related to those connections. And we have a couple of team members who have worked on those spaces. Lauren Bloomquist and Lauren Peisach, would either of you like to comment a bit more on connections between workforce and K-12?
I can start. I can say that states are really looking to ensure that students are both college and career ready. So some graduation standards are focused not just on being ready for college, but being ready for whatever post-secondary choices those students make. So being really intentional about the different pathways that students can encounter and experience in their secondary education to help them make decisions about what post-secondary life looks for them. I think we just talked about assessment and accountability, and that's another space where we've seen college and career readiness really kind of broaden and think not just about, again, that college readiness, but also that career readiness. So providing many opportunities for students to be on different pathways and determining what success for each individual looks like for them.
Thanks, Lauren. Lauren Peisach, what are you seeing around teacher leadership? In particular, what are you seeing in efforts to advance leadership related to issues of recruitment and retention? Anything that you're seeing in that space, particularly in regard to working conditions and making teaching a wonderful profession?
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. We've seen a lot in this space over the past couple of years. Especially when we take a look at induction and mentoring. We know how crucial induction and mentoring is for new teachers, particularly as they are getting established in the profession. They need the support of mentors to be able to build their skills. And while we know that that's a really valuable thing for the new teachers, we've also seen there's evidence to support that it is really meaningful for the mentor teachers too. It gives them opportunities to pass on their skills. And so some things we've been seeing in that space particularly is giving those teachers set aside time to make sure that they can do both their roles as a classroom teacher well, but also excel at being a mentor. In our 50-state comparison, which I highlighted earlier, you can actually see some of those qualifications for mentoring and how teachers or how states are supporting teachers in the profession.
Thank you, Lauren. Lauren and I are both former teachers, and so this question around teacher working conditions is always one we're glad to see in the chat and to answer. We have a final question that will close us out today before we leave you with a couple of resources and upcoming events. And that is about what was particularly new, different, or surprising this past year in these 6 areas we've elevated. And what might be the implications and notable trends for us going forward? I think folks can take this in different directions, but I'll let you close out by offering something you found particularly new, different, or surprising. And to give Lauren a breather, how about we start with Chris, and then we'll go from there.
All right, new, different, or surprising. Well, with K-12 funding being so closely tied to the performance of the economy, the new trend, it's not different or surprising, is that states are facing a different fiscal position than they had been in recent years, where they've been having historic levels of revenue growth and growth in general fund spending. That picture has been tightening quite a bit throughout 2025 going into future projections. So on the new front, states had been going through for the last few years looking for ways and strategies to invest dollars in the most effective ways as possible to bring up student outcomes. I think right now we're transitioning to a period where states are looking at spending growth areas and are trying to find savings or revenue options to maintain programs and services. So maybe not the most exciting or uplifting thing to say, but that's what I've been seeing and what I think we'll be looking at going forward this year.
Thank you, Chris. And as a reminder, the question was not what was the most exciting or uplifting, but what would you flag as new, different, or surprising? Heena, how about you?
I think the biggest thing to flag as new within school choice is this idea of universality, universal eligibility for private school choice programs, and universal district participation in public school choice, open enrollment programs is relatively new within the last few years. I believe in 2022, Arizona was the first to expand the eligibility for its private school choice, its ESA program, to be universal. And as of this year, there are at least 18 states with programs that have universal eligibility. So really this idea of allowing all students to apply for these programs is a relatively new trend, and it's grown really quickly from 0 to 18 states in just 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely, Heena. It's been moving at a pace we very seldomly see in education policy. Katja, what has been new, different, or surprising in student health?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways within student health, we've continued a lot of trends from last year, but maybe this won't be surprising to most folks, but I think just the focus and the intersection of the impact of social media and technology and AI on student health and wellness has been a big focus amongst most states, many states.
Yeah, absolutely. And a frequent conversation at dinner tables and cocktail parties amongst those of us with children. Lauren Bloomquist, how about you in the post-secondary space?
I think that states are going to continue to, one, try to meet workforce demand in areas where they see high needs. I think they're going to continue to try to make the case for their value. And I think one of the ways that they're going to do that is by connecting data from the K-12 system, post-secondary, and workforce. So to really make that case that post-secondary education after that K-12 system is really valuable to individuals and how that can contribute to the economy at large in each state.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I'll give a brief shout out to our friends at NCSL who are running a higher education task force at the moment. And the word value has been such a constant theme in those conversations. Adrienne, what's been new, different, or surprising in early care and education, the other end of the spectrum?
I would say the trends themselves are pretty consistent. I think that what has shifted the most over the past year is kind of the overall environment when it comes to ECE. There's a lot of uncertainty given some of the changes at the federal level, especially I think in the childcare space. In the previous administration in 2024, they actually put out a rule that required states to cap family copays at 7% and also to forward fund subsidies. And the current administration has rolled back that rule. So I think states are reeling a little bit in terms of quite a few states were had either come into compliance with that rule or were in progress of implementing those rules. So I think that there's just a little bit more uncertainty about which direction to take things. And I think also just given the fact that ECE and pre-K tend to be funded differently than K-12, and they're a little bit more vulnerable to shifts in the economy. So as state budgets tighten, I think we have obviously seen some states that have made significant investments in their ECE systems over the past year, but I think we're going to see a little bit more variability in how states are able to support those systems.
Thank you, Adrienne. And Lauren Peisach, brief commentary from you on anything new, different, or surprising in the educator workforce space.
Yeah, like some of my colleagues mentioned, a lot of the trends in the teacher space really have been ongoing for the past couple of years. So I wouldn't say anything necessarily new, but it has been heartening to see the expansion of lots of programs to support teachers and retain them. So we've seen, especially when we looked at our updating our 50-state comparison on teacher recruitment and retention, just the number of programs that have grown that support teachers with stipends for things like teaching in underserved schools or with specific populations that are hard to staff, like special education, for example. Or the expansion of scholarship programs to recruit new teachers to something that was really exciting last year, the expansion of stipends to paying student teachers. Because for a long time, we know that that was a space where students had to choose paid work or to complete their degree with their student teaching, which was often an obstacle to a lot of qualified candidates. So not necessarily new, but definitely encouraging to see all the support that teachers are getting out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for everyone who submitted a question today. I do want you to know that we have a log of them, and there are a couple specific questions in here where we may reach out to you directly to provide an answer. But if you did not submit a question or you'd like a direct response from us, you know how to get in touch with us. And we really appreciate your contributions. I hope that everyone will take a moment to join me in doing a virtual round of applause to our presenters today. Thank you so much for your contributions. Looking ahead, there are many projects and events that are in the works and for 2026 we want to make sure you're aware of. The first is about our next webinar. We will be hosting a debrief on the trends from Governor's State of the State addresses on March 25th. You can actually see live tracking of those addresses on our website currently. I believe over 15 governors, maybe even closer to 20, have given their addresses at this point, and we analyze those for their commentary on education policy. So please join us March 25th to hear what we learned from governors about their priorities in education. Also, please don't forget to save the date for our National Forum on Education Policy, July 8th to 10th in Washington, D.C. this year. Registration will open in early April. If you're interested in learning more about either of these events, please contact Antoinette Garcia. We will add her contact information in the chat. We are also eager to share many new resources with you to support your work. I wanted to specifically highlight a release from late 2025 around data systems I spoke to earlier. Our team analyzed every state's collected and reported data from ECE through K-12 to post-secondary in the workforce. We have many resources related to that project, and I hope that you'll take a minute to check out our findings. We will also add a couple of additional resources in the chat here for your access. The first is a blog from late 2025 that analyzed the elections last year and their implications for education policy. We also released a new brief on state efforts to support school leaders. Lauren mentioned a blog earlier about paid student teaching, and that's part of a longer blog series related to the recruitment and retention 50 state. We wanted to specifically mention our blog here on induction and mentoring. There's also one about targeted recruitment to address shortages. Adrienne and colleagues also released a brief on maximizing early care and education funding. And last year, we updated our 50 state comparison on post-secondary education funding. We are pleased to bring you these webinars to provide solutions to some of today's most pressing education policy issues. We could not do that without the support of our partners. These partners have a commitment to collaboration and innovation to pave the way for meaningful improvement in education. So to each of our partners, thank you, and we acknowledge your efforts and tremendous support. We trust that you're taking away at least one idea from today's conversation that your state can draw upon. If you have questions or requests related to our session, I hope you'll reach out to me directly with my email in the chat. And please know that today's recorded session will be shared in your post-event email. Thank you so much, everyone. We are adjourned.